James Sunderland, you were elected in 2019. And we're going to talk about your time serving our country a bit later in the interview. But first of all, I want to ask you about something you said recently, which I found chilling. It was in relation to the two MPs, David Amess and Jo Cox, who were murdered. And you said this, but they, Amess and Cox, won't be the last. Heaven forbid it happens again. But it's a question of when, not if. And what we have to do is everything in our power to prepare us for those situations. Let's just break it down. Tell me why you said those things. First of all, they won't be the last.
Well, several reasons. First of all, I was the last MP to see David Amess alive. We flew back from Qatar together, had a great trip, and he was dead 36 hours later. Kim Lepeta, a friend of mine, she's been outspoken recently about it, and she's absolutely right. So the threats are there. We're not sure what the threats are. The threats are many. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us as MPs to do what we can to protect ourselves. But that's not just about physical protection, that's also counter-surveillance, it's about understanding what the threats are, it's about briefings in Westminster, and becoming part of the solution. Because unless we're part of the solution for our own security, we'll always be at risk.
Tell me what sort of things you might have in mind. First of all, tell me about your own personal security.
Well, we are very careful. We don't advertise surgeries in advance. We have surgeries every week, but the location is never disclosed until the last minute. I'm quite open and free in the constituency. I'm very well looked after locally. The people of Bracknell have been fantastic to me. But ultimately, I think if you put yourself in a place and date and time, you're courting risk. We're also quite light on social media, so we are quite careful. I think movements as well, vary movements, come and go at different times. Just make sure that that the MPs are doing what they can to be looking after themselves.
Do you take any protection for your own security? Apart from not advertising where that you will be in a certain time at a certain place, are there any personal measures that you take?
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about my own security for obvious reasons, but we do take precautions. I'm never alone. We have people with us. The police are on call locally if we need that, but so far, thankfully, we've not had cause to call upon that support. And I think ultimately, if you are decent and honest and fair and treat people well, as I try and do, then hopefully we wouldn't have cause to use it. But I do completely sympathise with Mike Freer and with Virginia Crosby. They've made the decision to deploy extra measures, and why wouldn't you support them?
And you talked about some other more intelligence-related measures that could be introduced. Do you have any sense of what they might be? You also talked about training in the House of Commons. What sort of things do you have in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment MPs are well looked after in terms of being on the estate. Ring of Steel there, we've got good security. The Speaker clearly is the risk owner for security on the estate, but it's off the estate that concerns me, and I think we need a closer relationship with local police. I think we need to have a committee set up in Parliament, perhaps call it a Parliamentary Security Committee, where all of the stakeholders that might be involved in protecting MPs to be on that committee. But let's face it, it isn't just MPs, it's also key workers, it's also MP staff, it's all those in the firing line on a daily basis. And I think we have to broaden the debate to make sure that all those are well protected in the course of their duties.
Have you ever felt threatened?
No. Good. Thankfully. Online, yes. Physically, no.
Tell me a little about how you've been threatened online.
Well, I think the toxicity we see now online is very apparent. I think it's disappointing. MPs of all parties face that. It's abuse, it's vitriol. People attempt to degrade you. What they do is they try and defame you. They are looking for accusations, and what it does, it stokes the fire of division and hatred and abuse. It's designed deliberately by political activists to make me and my colleagues of all parties look bad in the eyes of the electorate. It's a very dangerous game, because what that does is raise the stakes. And of course the debate that we haven't had yet is to what extent the level of online abuse might lead to physical abuse. I believe there is a connection. We have to dial the whole thing down and just make sure that politicians can operate freely without all that unnecessary toxicity that we see online.
Do you think social media companies do enough?
No. I think the online safety bill going through at the moment is a good one. Online harms are there. Of course, it's more than just politicians. It's everyone. It's young children. But I think that the bosses of these online companies need to be better held to account for the material that appears online. If it's defamatory, vitriolic, abusive, it needs to be taken down very quickly.
Now, let's go to your pre-MP life. You served our country, you served in the British Army for 27 years. Tell me what the toughest moment was in those 27 years.
I did 8 operational tours in the end, so away a lot of separation. The armed forces do a fantastic job, they earn their money, called upon to do lots of different things, any manner of tasks coming in. I think, if I'm being brutally frank, the toughest moment probably was in my Iraq tours in Basra. Real threat, IEDs with direct fire. And I think it was difficult when I was out there for the second time that we were doing the drawdown tour. So we had to basically draw down theatre and bring it back to the UK, redeploy in good order, at the same time as maintain our operational posture. So if I was being quite direct, I'd say making sure that your troops, your soldiers, those who you serve alongside are safe. And I think that for any officer in command, making sure your people are safe is the toughest challenge.
And there must have been times when it was simply impossible to maintain some of your troops' safety, and you would have lost people. Perhaps you witnessed that loss at close quarters. It's difficult for most of us to imagine what that might be like.
Yeah, I mean, I think different theatres are very different. The threats that we face were very different depending upon where you are. I've done multiple tours over the last 26, 27 years. I take my hat off to my colleagues in the infantry and in the combat arms who are there doing it every day. Huge risk, great people. I was a logistics officer, so not always in the direct line of fire, but nevertheless, with the asymmetric warfare that we face these days, the threats are there for everyone. And maintaining that safety and managing risk was part of the job, and it remains true today. We ask a lot of our people who serve overseas and at home with the armed forces, and we need to look after them. And
do we as a country give those who have served our country enough thanks? It's the most heroic job imaginable. Yet an estimated 3 to 6% of people sleeping rough served in the armed forces.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think we're going to be careful with the analogy because, of course, not all veterans are mad, bad, or sad. The vast majority are living perfectly happy, successful lives, and the demand for the services that veterans have and the skills they have is really acute. So you don't find many people who are struggling to find meaningful work. But for those that do struggle, we absolutely have that role to look after them. And I commend people like Ben Wallace, Johnny Mercer and others who have taken this forward. The offer is very good. PTSD is being dealt with very effectively now. Op Courage, of course, other initiatives, the Armed Forces Covenant. So I think we're getting much, much better now at, first of all, identifying those in need and then resolving their issues. So I'm much more confident that this country will be the best place in the world to be a veteran.
So I mentioned that you were elected in 2019. That huge moment, a huge landslide.
It was.
What followed? Of course, we had COVID to deal with, but the political turbulence that followed the 2019 victory, that must have been a very destabilising environment for a new MP to find themselves in. How would you describe it?
Well, I was selected very late in Bracknell. Got an opportunity, I grabbed it. The association in Bracknell, very supportive, won the election. I left the army with 6 days' notice, so it came as a complete shock to me. The army literally opened the door, kicked me out, and closed the door. I got what I asked for, very eminent employer, and I owe them a lot. But in terms of the turbulence you mentioned, wow, Brexit election, big majority. Then, of course, we've had the Brexit legislation itself. We've had a whole series of turbulent events that have made the last 3 years quite difficult. But I think I was very well placed to deal with that from my background. But give them credit, younger colleagues who aren't blessed perhaps with the same life experience that I've got have done brilliantly, and I take my hat off to all of my colleagues on the 109, 2019 intake. They're all great people and they've done brilliantly, and I think many of them, most of them will retain their seats through sheer hard work. They work hard, they're diligent.
Yeah, all right. Come on, I'm trying to get you to emote. You're in the middle of a political I won't use a word beginning with S, a storm, a political storm. 3 prime ministers in as many months. That's a lot to deal with. Emotionally, psychologically, but put it into, I mean, maybe you'll say, no, it's not, it's fine. Well, look, having 3 prime ministers in 3 months is completely normal.
Look, I mean, I think it's fine. It depends how you deal with things, but this is politics. It's been very unstable for a while. We've had a turbulent parliament. We've got a great prime minister now, so we've been on a journey. And actually, I think that most of us, in terms of colleagues, have dealt very well with it. And it has been vitriolic and toxic at times and difficult at times, but we have to believe in what we're doing. I believe in conservatism, and I think ultimately, if you believe in that and you have the conviction, then it's easy to push through.
You resigned. You were a parliamentary private secretary at the time of your resignation. You resigned on the 6th of July 2022 in protest at Boris Johnson's conduct. I mean, that's not a normal... Let people into what it is like that day when you say, I've got to go.
Yeah.
Tell me.
That day was quite extraordinary, actually, and it was like dominoes falling one after the other. I mean, Boris Johnson referred to the pack mentality. I don't think necessarily that was the case, but you had individuals who perhaps had had enough. It was very toxic, the inbox, it was difficult, having to defend the government all of the time. Partygate was difficult. I think you get to a certain point in politics where you have to draw stumps and embrace the new. That's what I did at the time. I love Boris, fantastic politician. We're great friends, brilliant Prime Minister, and I would never ever speak ill of him. He did a great deal for our country, and he's revered now by so many people. But I think at that point in time, it was the right thing to do. Liz Truss' experiment didn't quite work, although her vision was probably right in terms of growth. We now got a guy, number 10, who is calm, he's cautious, he's competent, instilling real confidence across the party. And I have every confidence that he will do a great job for the next election and beyond.
Final question. You said at the beginning of this interview that you were the last MP to see David Amess.
Yeah.
36 hours later, after that conversation, you said he'd been murdered. When you heard that, you'd just been speaking to him pretty much the day before or so.
Yeah.
Tell me, what was your reaction? What happened to you? What did you do when you heard the news?
I became very close with David very quickly. Great mentor, friend to me. And we travelled together, went to Goodwood together, went to Qatar together. So I thought the world of him. And about an hour before he was killed, he sent me a text. I laughed, it was brilliant. An hour later, a colleague phoned me to say that he'd been stabbed in Leigh-on-Sea. And we heard later that afternoon that he'd been killed. And I was at Crowthorne Fire Station doing a visit. I got the call, got the text, knew it had to be true. And the world went numb, as it would do for any of our colleagues who befall that ultimate fate. And, when Virginia Crosby says we need to do more and Kim Ledbetter says let's do more, the risks are there. And I think that we can't afford to negate those risks. We have to manage those risks all the way through. And I think at this point in time, there's more work to do. David was a fantastic MP. Great guy. He was decent. He was honest. Great personality, great fun. We need more politicians like him, I think.
I've enjoyed getting to know you better today. James Sunderland, thank you.
Thank you.